Welcome to my channel. First comment in this that where are you seeing the video? Write in the comment box. The first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the smell: antiseptic, cold, and sterile, followed by the soft, rhythmic beeping of a machine that seemed to be counting my heartbeats like they were precious. My body felt like it had been wrung out and folded wrong. My head throbbed. My ribs screamed with every breath. A nurse named Diana appeared above me almost immediately, her face soft with relief, telling me I was safe, that I was at St. Christopher's Hospital, and that I had been unconscious for 3 full days following a car accident I had no memory of. 3 days. I had lost 3 days of my life and hadn't even known they were gone. Diana gave me water, adjusted my fore, and told me my mother had just stepped out for coffee, but then she paused, that particular kind of pause that carries weight, and told me there was someone else. A man. He had been there since the very first night, she said. He hadn't left once. I turned my head slowly toward the corner of the room, and that is when I saw him. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of worn hands that belong to a man who has worked hard all his life. His head was bowed, fingers folded together. The moment my eyes found his face, he looked up, and his eyes filled with tears so fast it startled me. I did not know him. I was certain of that. But the way he looked at me made my chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with broken ribs. Before I could speak, the door burst open and my mother Carol came rushing in, her coffee cup trembling in her hand. She froze the instant she crossed the threshold. I watched the color drain from her face, not from relief at seeing me awake, but from something else entirely. Fear. She recovered quickly, rushing to my bedside, pressing her lips to my forehead, talking fast about water and rest and the doctors. But I had seen her eyes dart to the man in the corner. I had seen the panic. So I stopped her. Quietly, firmly, the way you do when you already sense that the answer is going to cost you something. I asked her who he was. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard in my life. The man stood slowly, like someone preparing himself for something unavoidable. He said his name was Robert Callahan, and then he said the words that made the heart monitor beside me spike and my entire body go rigid. He said he was my father. My father. The man my mother had told me died before I was born. The man whose imaginary grave I had cried over as a child, pressing small flowers into the dirt and wondering what his voice had sounded like. The man I had invented 100 different versions of in my mind: a pilot, a soldier, a hero because a dead father felt more bearable than an absent one, and a heroic story felt better than an empty space. That man was standing in the corner of my hospital room with tears running down his face, very much alive, having sat beside me for 3 days while I was unconscious and had no idea he even existed. My mother tried to redirect me. She talked about blood pressure and recovery and giving me time. I told her calmly, precisely, not to do that. Not to wrap this moment in concern for my health when the real wound had nothing to do with the accident. She broke then. She sat down and told me the truth she had carried for 28 years. She and Robert had been young and in love, the burning, consuming kind of love that destroys everything it touches. He had a drinking problem. He had been violent once, not toward her directly, but close enough to matter, close enough to terrify a woman who was 2 months pregnant and had everything to lose. She had left. She had changed cities, built a new life, and chosen a story for me that felt cleaner than the truth. She had told me he was dead because she believed a daughter deserved a hero, not a complicated and broken man. He told her that he had deserved to know I existed. She whispered that she knew. And that quiet admission of guilt was somehow worse than anger would have been. When I asked Robert to come back into the room and face me, he entered like a man walking into a courtroom, shoulders squared, chin slightly lowered, prepared to receive whatever verdict the first handed him. I asked him how he had found me. He told me he had gotten sober 12 years ago, that he had quietly searched for my mother for years without obsession, and that 2 years ago he had found her on social media and seen my photographs. He said I had his mother's eyes. Her exact eyes. He had known immediately, 2 years. He had known for 2 years and had written 47 letters that he'd never sent. He said he hadn't felt he had the right to walk back into a life he had never been part of, even if that absence had not been entirely his own choice. I asked him if he was dying. I asked it plainly because I needed to know if this was a deathbed confession dressed up as a reunion. He shook his head. He said he was healthy. A carpenter in Vermont, he lived alone with a dog named Henry. He had come because he had seen my name connected to an accident on the news, and he had not been able to stay away. He said he knew he had no right. He said it more than once. But he could not let me die if I was going to die without knowing that he had existed, that he had thought of me every single day, that his love for the idea of me had been the quiet constant of his entire adult life. My brother Jason arrived then, and the room fractured all over again. He walked in bright-faced with relief at seeing me awake and then stopped completely when he saw Robert. He looked at my mother. He asked who the man was. I told him. I watched something break behind my brother's eyes quietly, precisely, like a clean crack running through glass. He asked my mother if she had known. She said yes. He walked back out the door without another word, and I understood him completely because I had wanted to do the same thing and simply couldn't because I was attached to tubes and a hospital bed and a body that hadn't quite decided yet whether it was finished surviving. With my mother gone after Jason, Robert and I were alone for the first time. Something shifted in the room, not toward warmth exactly, but toward honesty. I asked him about his mother, Eleanor, the woman whose eyes I had apparently inherited. He smiled, then his first real smile, small and fragile at the edges. He said she was the most stubborn woman he had ever known, that she had fought a parking ticket for 3 years and won, that she made the best apple pie in the county, read every night before bed, and died believing she had no grandchildren, that she would have loved me fiercely and driven my mother absolutely crazy with opinions and been right about half of them. I told him I could not call him dad, not today, maybe not ever. I told him I was not a missing piece he could slide back into place, that I was a whole person who had built herself without him. And I needed him to understand that before anything else could happen between us. He said he understood completely. He said that whoever had built me had done a remarkable job. The nurse came in a little later and mentioned, almost in passing, that even while I was unconscious I had squeezed every hand that was offered to me. He had been one of those hands. He had sat in that corner chair and offered his hand to a daughter who didn't know he was her father, and I had held it anyway, without knowing. I didn't know what to do with that information except sit with it quietly and let it settle somewhere deep inside me. I asked about the letters. All 47 of them. He said he still had every single one in a showbox under his bed. I told him I wanted to read them someday, not now, but someday. He said he would keep them as long as I wanted. He told me he had written about everything. I imagined first birthday, my first day of school, all the things he would have taught me. How to change a tire. How to recognize a dishonest person. How to make Eleanor's apple pie. 28 years of conversations that had lived only in a showbox beneath a bed in Vermont. I told him I wanted to read them someday, not now, but someday. He said he would keep them as long as I wanted. He told me he had written about everything. I imagined first birthday, my first day of school, all the things he would have taught me. How to change a tire. How to recognize a dishonest person. How to make Eleanor's apple pie. 28 years of conversations that had lived only in a showbox beneath a bed in Vermont. As the room grew dim with evening, I told him he could move his chair to the window if he wanted to stay a little longer. He didn't make it dramatic. He simply moved the chair, the same chair he had sat in for 3 days, and settled by the window and pulled a book from his coat pocket. A Tale of Two Cities. I stared at him. I told him, quietly, that I taught English literature for a living. He closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them, they were shining. He whispered, "Of course you do." And in those 3 small words, I heard the full weight of everything we had missed to end. Something fragile and not yet nameable that might, with time, become something real. My mother returned as night settled fully over the room. Jason had gone home. She sat beside me, took my hand gently, and told me she loved me more than she had ever loved anything in her life. I told her I knew that. I told her I was angry, deeply and genuinely angry, but that I also understood she had been 22 years old and frightened and had done what she believed was necessary for survival. I was not ready to talk about it that night. She said, "Okay," and the 3 of us, mother, daughter, and the man by the window with my grandmother's eyes, sat together in the quiet hum of the hospital, each of us holding something the others could not carry. And somehow, improbably, none of us entirely alone. I have thought a great deal since that night about what family actually is. I used to believe it was the story you were handed at birth, fixed, finished, and unchangeable. But I woke up from an accident with broken ribs and a fractured collarbone and 28 years of a carefully constructed lie. And I also woke up with more than I had before. A man in a corner chair who had stayed for 3 days without being asked. 47 letters in a showbox. A grandmother named Eleanor who read every night and would have argued over me lovingly. I do not know what Robert is to me yet. I do not know if the word father will ever sit comfortably in my mouth when I say it to him. But he stayed. When I was broken and unconscious and had no idea he was even real, he stayed. And I have come to believe that sometimes love does not get to begin at the beginning. Sometimes it only gets to begin at the staying. And maybe that is enough. Maybe that is exactly where we start.